Hi, this is Lisa Costa-Beer. Join us on FX Medicine next week, where I'll be talking to Dr. Brad Leach on modifiable risk factors for autoimmune disease, a gut perspective. Subscribe to us on your favourite podcast app and follow us on social media to make sure you never miss an episode.
Welcome to FX Medicine, bringing you the latest in evidence-based, integrative, functional and complementary medicine. I'm Dr. Michelle Woolhouse. FX Medicine acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, where we live and work, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. The global medicinal cannabis market is projected to experience incredible future growth. It's predicted that the Australian legal cannabis market will reach a market value of more than $800 million by 2033. So why the explosive growth of medicinal cannabis? And here to talk us through the emerging growth landscape is Dr. Nic Giummarra. Nic is a GP based in northern Queensland, and he's set about to become an expert in this curious, historically fascinating and potentially life-transforming medication. Dr. Nic is one of the lead GPs at Cannabis Clinicians Australia, the formal body of cannabis in Australia. Welcome to the show, Nic.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Great, thanks. So happy
Excellent.
and so excited about this podcast. So I just wanted to start with the basics of cannabis in its current form. So what is the definition of medical cannabis and how does it work?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a big one.
I suppose medical cannabis, if you're talking in Australia at the moment, it's the cannabis prescribed by a doctor or a nurse practitioner in some states. And in a sense, the underlying plant genetics and plant availability is probably not too dissimilar from what people would find sort of in the recreation market, because as you may or may not know, this is a plant that's been around for thousands of years. But what we're specifically talking about is in Australia is those prescribed by doctors legally, because otherwise it's illegal to have cannabis unless you're in Canberra. Then you're allowed a couple of plants. So I guess they're sort of talking about different models and ways you can access it here in Australia.
I was just going to say, you mentioned the evolution of the plant, being, probably hundreds of thousands of years old, really. And where does it actually come from, and why has it come and gone so often, being both so demonised and yet so applauded? Take us through the history of this fascinating plant.
This I could probably talk about for an hour, but in the short version is that the first recorded history was in northern China, actually, and it was used in northern China probably about 4000 BC, and used for multiple reasons: as a medicine, as a food, as a fibre. They used to use it for ropes and sails on ships. And essentially, and about 4,000 years ago, it appeared in the first, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a Chinese pharmacopoeia where they describe cannabis being used for multiple conditions: fevers, epilepsy, the spasms of tetanus and rabies. And so this is, some people say that this is the most useful plant in human history. There really hasn't been another plant that's evolved with us so thoroughly and for so many different uses. It then essentially, over the centuries, spread west. It was seen in India and Ayurvedic medicine, and that's probably more so where it became more involved in rituals and burial ceremonies and other things like that. And then slowly it's been recorded in Egyptian history, the Roman Empire, the Greeks and the Greek-Roman pharmacopoeia used it, and it sort of just spread to across the globe over those centuries. But what's interesting, really, if you do the maths on it, in sort of a modern history, cannabis has only not been really available to us or been made illegal for about 1% of the time. And And really it happened, it's a funny story actually. It was the 1925 Geneva Convention. There was, at the time in the world, there was a big problem with opium, opiates and cocaine being exported, imported, spread around the world, causing lots of problems. And they had this international convention trying to stop opiates and cocaine. Cannabis wasn't on the list. Apparently, at the last minute, the Egyptians said, can we add cannabis to the list? And the reason they wanted that was because they cited it was causing widespread insanity. But the more official reason is that the Egyptians wanted the Egyptian farmers to grow cotton for export to the British, but they were all growing hemp plants. And so it was added to the list in 1925, and then slowly countries around the world adopted it in the same category as opium and cocaine.
Right. So capitalism strikes again, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And but I suppose that was the first kind of 1930s, 1940s. There was a couple of movies that came out in America as well called Reefer Madness and something else that also just
so a bit of propaganda around it,
Real propaganda. And then the second sort of major wave against it was Nixon's war on drugs in the 1970s.
That's right.
Where he also made it illegal, and there was I can't remember what the Drug Act was called in 1971, but basically it became illegal. And the underlying reason for that really was he was trying to maintain his own political power, and by making cannabis illegal, he prevented the uprising of the revolution of the 70s and the anti-war movement and the hippies, as well as the African Americans and the Mexicans. And that's approximately the time they first started using the term marijuana, because it hadn't really been used before then. So marijuana is a Mexican term, and it was trying to make it seem otherworldly and something like bad and evil. And they used to say it was a gateway drug and would lead to crimes and homicides and things. So really, from the 1930s to the 1970s, 80s, the world cracked down on it. And really, since about 2010, Uruguay was the first country to legalise. Slowly, all the countries are either changing it from criminal to decriminalisation or legalising it, or, like in Australia, creating a legal medical market for it. So if you look at the whole thing, less than 1% of world's history, we have not had this plant in our pharmacopoeia.
And so what was really fascinating to me when it started to kind of open up in the medical kind of world was this talking about this innate opioid. So long time we've known about the opioid receptor system, and medicine has kind of exploited that by, having access to drugs like morphine and pethidine and the like. How long have we known about the innate cannabinoid system? So all of the endocannabinoid, and how exactly does it work?
Good question. So it hasn't been very long. It was discovered in the 1980s, I believe. It was identified that THC was the active ingredient. Was it 1960s? Oh, I think I'm wrong. Actually, 1960s, I think, was THC. And then the further discovering CBD and the endocannabinoid system. So it was sort of really probably the 60s, 70s and 80s, I believe, that we discovered this widespread network of receptors in the body that still isn't properly taught in medical schools, which is quite incredible, because really the endocannabinoid system is one of the most crucial systems in your body.
Tell us about it.
It really works. So it basically works. It's all about balance and homeostasis. You have receptors all over your body. The only place we do not have any cannabis receptors is on your brainstem, which is fantastic, and that's why you can't overdose on it, because you can't shut down your breathing drive or your heart rate like the benzodiazepines and opioids.
That's good news.
So that's great. And yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's why a lot of people even say, when you go back to the history of it, it's almost like this plant has co-evolved with us. Maybe 6,000 years is not long enough, but it just fits so perfectly in our body. And these receptors, which are mostly G protein linked receptors, actually, so sort of
what does
slower
that mean?
onset.
What's a G protein receptor?
I have to go back to pharmacology here. So there are these membrane receptors that cross the membrane 7 times, but they're slower onset receptors. So, you have your ion channels in your neurons that cause immediately action potentials. G proteins, they act slower to form a cascade of events that go to the nucleus and change cell function, which is important to know because when people either have CBD or THC, it's not necessarily an immediate effect. The longer people are on it, almost the better they get.
Really? So tell us about I was going to say, tell us about these key chemicals like, THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD, cannabinol. What is the difference between them and from a pharmacological or chemical perspective?
Okay, so actually before I explain that, it's important to know that we all have our own endocannabinoid molecules. The two most famous ones, one was discovered called anandamide, and ananda is a Sanskrit word that means bliss. And the other one, 2AG, and what we're talking about when you use the cannabis plant is the phytocannabinoids, so the plant version of these molecules, which are CBD and THC. But in fact, the cannabis plant has about 500 different ingredients in it. Some people say up to 1,000. And so, but the two most famous ones really, and the ones we mostly talk about are the major cannabinoids, THC and CBD. THC basically binds to cannabis-1 receptors in your brain and central nervous system, and it's the one that causes the majority of the pain relief, sedation, impairment, that feeling that people say they're stoned or high, but I think it's actually something else, which we can talk about later, which is actually a switching down of the default mode network in your brain. So THC really goes to your brain. CBD, and there are other minor cannabinoids that people are just starting to learn about, CBN, CBG, CBV, go to your body. And CBD in particular is a powerful anti-inflammatory. So CBD binds to CB2 receptors in your body. Yep. Most of those are on your immune system. So when I see patients with rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, thyroiditis, anything autoimmune, I think they're out of balance, right? They've got a hyperimmune, they need balance. But there are CB2 receptors in all your joints, in your muscles, in your gut, in your pelvic organ, on your blood vessels. So it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. Some people say 20 times stronger than aspirin. And so it doesn't interact, because it's on its own receptors, it doesn't really interact with anything. So the only interactions it possibly has, it's metabolized in the liver by your cytochrome P450 enzyme. So if a patient is on other medications, the classic in sort of cannabis medicine is probably the anti-epileptics. So there can be a bit of competition for those enzyme systems. But generally, actually, I find when I check patients' liver enzymes, they actually get better for some reason, not worse. And it also
that's a kind of mystery of it, Okay.
I think what's happening with the epilepsy is often if they get on the right dose of CBD, they actually lower their anti-epileptic medicines and their liver gets better. I think that's what's happening, but that's not an academic. That's just in my, the patients I've treated.
Clinical experience, So, Nic, what are some of the approved conditions for medical cannabis in Australia? Like, you talk about it having this incredible sort of widespread impact, particularly with inflammation. We all talk about, this subacute inflammation, being almost like all cause, for a lot of the chronic diseases. Yes, but what are some of the approved conditions for medical cannabis in Australia?
The main ones are chronic non-cancer pain. So it depends. There's sort of two streams in Australia. Any doctor can apply through the TGA for what's called a saftey authority, and to get an authority for an individual patient, commonly non-cancer pain, cancer-related symptoms. So cannabis we can't say that it treats cancer, but it certainly treats the pain, anxiety, insomnia, nausea of cancer symptoms, cancer treatment. We can use it for anxiety, insomnia, epilepsy, the disruptive, harmful behaviours of autism. We can use it for depression and endometriosis, multiple spasticity and multiple sclerosis, tremors of Parkinson's disease, palliative care, osteoarthritis, neuropathic pain, migraines, fibromyalgia. There's really, I mean, the list of conditions is in Australia is honestly fantastic. I rarely get a patient that doesn't fit in. Once you start using it, it sort of works a little bit for everything, or if it doesn't treat the presenting symptom, and this is what research also shows almost universally, is that the patient just gets better. Their quality of life improves, their sleep improves, their mood improves, their desire to connect with other people and socialise improves. They'll often say, most of the studies in pain, and there's numerous there, and we can link them to your show notes and meta-analyses and system reviews and things, that will say it reduces pain greater than placebo by 30 to 50%.
Oh, that's
and in fact,
really
even the TGA website, if you go to the TGA website, Medicinal Cannabis, they've got a whole section there. They say that cannabis, and this probably is cannabis products with a little bit of THC, will reduce pain by 30 to 50% greater than placebo. Unfortunately, our pain colleagues and the pain specialists still say that cannabis doesn't work and generally don't use it.
That's interesting.
But, yeah, it's really interesting. I don't quite understand what's going on there. But what I'd like to add to that, so just say you've got 10 out of 10 pain, and just say you get 50% reduction, so now it's 5 out of 10. What happens with these patients is they'll say something like, or a version of, yes, I still have 5 out of 10 pain, but it moves to the back of my brain and I don't really care about it anymore. Yes, I still have 5 out of 10 pain, but it doesn't stop me from going out, sleeping, playing golf, going dancing, and so it doesn't bother me anymore.
And I think the interesting thing about pain is that it's just such a complex emotional experience for people. And then if you add things like, depression, social isolation, loneliness, and that projection of the future, like how am I ever going to cope? It sounds like a treatment such as this really helps that sickness behaviour as well.
It does. It really does. It's quite amazing, actually. And one of the best things it does is THC at night time, and it can be low dose, 3 or 4 milligrams or something of THC at night. If you get one of the best things cannabis does is helps people sleep and they wake up fresh. And we've probably spoken about this over the years, Michelle, just how important sleep is. You've got to get your patients
big
sleeping.
Advocate.
Totally. I know, and I think I probably learnt that from you 10 years ago now. But you get people sleeping, and then suddenly the pain's not as bad. You get them sleeping, and they're not as depressed. They're not as anxious. They respond differently at work. It's almost number one. All right, let's just get you to sleep. Let's get you a couple of weeks of good sleep, and then let's see what symptoms you have. Because you may not. Some people I don't think are actually depressed. They're just so sleep deprived.
Absolutely. We know
exhausted.
That's right, and we know sleep is, it's detoxifying. It helps with the immune system, the inflammation system, emotional regulation. Hormonal balance. All of these kind of critical things. So I'm totally still banging on about it, Nic.
It's.
I wanted to ask you about some of the neuroplastic changes associated with pain management. Is neuroplasticity one of the reasons it works in all these conditions, or is it multi-layered?
It's interesting. I think I've treated about 850 patients now with cannabis, and and just listening to them, a lot of them started to say, I would notice in them after 2 or 3 months or so, maybe 6 months, they'd say, I just feel like I'm wired differently. I feel like I'm a different person. And so I went, it sounds like there's neuroplasticity. And I've recently been looking for the evidence, and it's very mixed. Some studies will say it does cause neuroplasticity, others say that it doesn't. I feel, listening to my patients, that it does. It just seems that it is doing something to their brain structure. A study that really stood out to me was they gave people THC and put them in a functional MRI scanner, and they looked to see what their brain was doing. And one of the things that it was doing, it was putting the default mode network offline. So Have you spoken about this on your show before with anyone? Just with the
Well,
listeners know about?
no, it's totally new. So explain to
Okay.
our listeners what the default mode network is.
So yes, so it's a series of brain parts that talk to each other when we're in not goal or task oriented. So when our minds and behaviors are idle, when we're going for a walk, when we're daydreaming, when you're washing the dishes, your brain goes into this default mode network. And it's this connection between your cingulate gyrus, your prefrontal cortex, your hippocampus, your amygdala, and I believe your insula, which is a part of your prefrontal cortex. And your insula is the part of your brain that makes you feel like you.
Yep.
It makes you feel like you're a person, where the end of your fingertips is the end of your being, and it keeps you as a distinct entity compared to the rest of the world. And the insula is the part when people take the psychedelics and they put them in a brain scanner, it's the insula that goes offline. And I believe that's when people describe this sort of feel like they're going to die on psychedelics, or they call it ego death. I think it's the insula that's going offline. So your default mode network can be a very destructive place if you have that your voice is self-critical, if you're telling yourself all the bad things about yourself, if you're reliving bad memories, or if you're just so stuck in your narrative of your life that it just causes you so much anxiety and depression and fear and catastrophizing. I mean,
and especially for people with
I think
challenging
we all do
backgrounds, and yes, we all do it.
Yeah.
We all have a self-critic to some degree, but your point is that some people have got quite extreme and very harsh self-critics that can, create a very almost ubiquitous experience for them of negativity. It's hard to shift.
And I think, and so what THC does is it turns down those networks, and so your brain is no longer you're no longer yourself, in the sense that you're not in your fixed narrative. And what I've found is people, if they have a little bit of THC, now we're not talking 2 grams and becoming so impaired that you can't do anything. You're talking a few milligrams perhaps, and then in that state you've almost got this window of opportunity to lay down some new neural pathways. And if you do that, and I think see a psychologist, have a really good intentional conversation with a friend. I have some patients that go for hikes in the mountains by themselves, or they'll go to yoga class, or they'll do some
meditation experiences, those kind of things.
It seems like you need to combine it. So in this sense, cannabis is really a tool. And what I've found is those people really, or they'll do journaling, or they'll do artwork, or they'll do something creative. And just your mind needs to be idle, and it needs to be semi-intentional, but not so structured that it can't connect. And that's where people, I think, have this opportunity to change their stories, change their narrative. And particularly, I think, for sort of the mild to moderate anxiety and depression, just amazing. I've heard people say, I'm just not anxious anymore. I'm just a different person. I don't catastrophize. It's like their story is different. And I guess for pain then, bringing it full circle, how much of people's pain is actually the nociceptive pain of their joints or their back pain or their muscles, and how much of it is at the other sort of the mental load and the mental burden and the social consequences and I can't go to work, how am I going to earn money, how am I going to pay for this?
Yeah,
I mean, it's all
absolutely.
Nic,
and it's so powerful to actually talk about the holistic aspect of pain, because sometimes, like in medicine, we're sort of taught this chemical orientated experience of medicine as kind of almost like the top of the rank. So we kind of acknowledge the psychosocial aspects of it, but we kind of de-emphasize it. And it's sounding like if we can really bring the narrative about the power of that psychosocial aspect of ourselves, and to keep it in that equal aspect of the biological. So we're taught, the biopsychosocial model, yet it's the bio that tends to kind of win every time. Yet in reality, the psychosocial aspect is so powerful and yet so de-emphasized. Yeah, that's right. So that's just absolutely fascinating.
Like, I got into cannabis very accidentally. I had no intention of doing this. It just was a medicine that worked so consistently. And I started seeing so many incredible, like every day patients tell me that it's changing their life. So it's almost to the point where I can't stop doing it, because it's really the only medicine I've seen that has had such dramatic benefits to people's lives in such sort of beautiful, esoteric ways. And that sort of suits my personality. But the thing I love about it is that it is also still so fixed in science and neurobiology and physiology. So it's the perfect mix of the biopsychosocial model for me.
And ecology as well. But so I wanted to hold you there, because it's a perfect segue of what you just said. Because through reading, when I was learning about medical cannabis, there's over 700 different plant cultivars and probably growing, and scientists are discovering more and more benefits. What are some of the latest studies showing in this fast-evolving world of like pharmacanna, or whatever they call it, this almost explosion? So tell us about how the plant cultivars work.
So, So it's interesting. I've probably never learned so much about plant biology since I started doing this. But
that's great.
So where do you start? So I guess there's all these companies around the world really that are trying to grow sort of unique genetics of plants with what they call the chemovar. So the chemovar is that mixture of let's say 500 ingredients in the plant, the percentage of THC, the percentage of CBD, the minor cannabinoids, and what everybody in the industry is really excited about at the moment are the terpenes.
Oh, yes.
Do you know about terpenes?
I know about the terpenes.
Terpenes are, for people who don't know, are the bioactive aromatic compounds in plants and vegetables that also have these active effects in the body. The classic terpene that people probably know about but don't know the name of is linalool, which is in lavender. And the reason lavender smells like lavender and is calming because it has this dominant terpene, linalool. Cannabis smells the way it is because of all its terpenes. So, and the terpene mix, like THC is a little bit like, so there are probably 50 common terpenes in cannabis plants, and of those, there's probably 5 or 10 that we really, the sedating ones, the pain relieving ones, the uplifting ones. So this is when what they're actually talking about is the chemovar. So when these companies grow plants, and whether they do it outdoor in full sun or in a greenhouse or indoors where they regulate the light and the humidity, they're trying to get this unique mix of chemical composition in the plant to have certain effects. So, I mean, I think we're all pretty united on what, CBD goes to the body. It's a really strong anti-inflammatory. THC goes to the brain for pain relief, sedation. THC you ever think about THC as a bit like ethanol in alcohol? So whether you're having straight whiskey or a pina colada, the intoxicating effects is the ethanol. The flavour of it and how you drink it and how you enjoy it and what it does for you, it depends on everything else in it.
Right.
So, for example, you can have a plant that people inhale that is there's an uplifting terpene called limonene, and there's alpha-beta pinene that are really associated with focus. So if I have someone who has ADHD and depression and I give them a mild dose THC plant full of alpha-beta pinene, limonene, for the next 8 hours, they are uplifted, focused, they sit down, they work, they're engaged, they're creative. They're not sedated and sitting on the couch, because the sedating terpenes are things like myrcene and linalool.
Right.
And so cannabis can be quite stimulating. There are some, ultra marathon runners, distance swimmers, who'll have a little bit before they train, and they get into the flow state and they can perform for hours and hours and hours.
That sounds good.
So it's the interesting thing about it is, I mean, traditionally there were two main types of plants called the sativa and indica plants, which people are probably more aware of. And the indica plants were shorter, bushier, and they had more likely had the sedating, calming terpene profile, whereas the taller sativa plants had more of the uplifting, energetic, stimulating terpene profile. What's thought to happen is when it all became illegal, as we talked about before, people couldn't grow illegally the sativa plants. They were too tall in their backyard, so they grew the indica plants. And so part of the stigma of cannabis is that it's like a sedating drug.
Yeah.
When in fact, if it was the other way around, if the indica plant had all the uplifting terpenes, I don't think we'd be thinking about cannabis today as a sedating plant. I think we'd be thinking about it as a performance-enhancing plant.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And in fact, the plant geneticists now will say, look, when you talk about the genetics of a plant and how it spreads and bought and sold around the world and cultivators and things, that there actually isn't any true sativa or indicas anymore. It's all been hybridized. And so people, the growers will say, oh, I've got, I don't know, there's almost the generic names, and they're all ridiculous names like Gorilla Glue or strawberry cake or
so tell us about that, because when I did, tell us about the prescribing, and first of all, I want to sort of talk about from our listeners' perspective. Like, we know that all GPs can sign up and prescribe medical cannabis, but really, is that the best way for a patient to be assessed for medical cannabis? Or what, in your opinion, what's the best way people can access this? Should they talk to their GP? Tell us about how we access it.
Yeah. I think, look, my big vision, I was working as a GP, now I'm doing this, and I don't like that I'm fragmenting care, but I can see it as a phase of the industry where we're sort of learning how to use cannabis. Right. And then I think sort of as a sort of cannabinoid specialist, and this is sort of what I spend a lot of my time doing in my other role, is going back and teaching GPs to incorporate it as a tool into their practice. This should be taught in medical schools. We should be prescribing it. If someone can't sleep or has pain or nausea in hospitals, this should be in aged care facilities, in palliative care wards, pain specialists, neurologists, pediatricians. We should all be prescribing this. This should not be. There shouldn't be a role for me as a individual doctor working specifically for this. But this is just a phase of the industry, so I'm owning that, and I can see the benefit. So I GPs, and there are certainly, I work for, I volunteer in the leadership team of the Cannabis Clinicians Australia, which is really the only independent, not-for-profit group in Australia. And for a membership fee, people can get access to all of us, ask lots of questions. We have a live rolling Slack channel that people can just ask questions. And we also have free modules with CPD teaching the basics of cannabis medicine.
Right.
But in essence, what people just need to, with a small selection of medicines, you really start with CBD. The anti-inflammatory, it goes to your body, it brings about, like we talked about, that balance and homeostasis. And you start with CBD dominant oil. You start low, a quarter of a mil twice a day. Things people need to know is like mostly in Australia we use oils, and the oils last sort of 6 to 8 hours in the body. So you dose them usually 2 or 3 times a day. Usually they're CBD dominant, which is a great way to start because CBD also stops any side effects of THC. Stops any.
That's good.
Yeah. Sometimes what people don't know is if people have too much THC, you can give them CBD as an antidote, and it almost can bring them back into themselves and bring them back into a calmer state of mind.
Right.
So you start with the CBD dominant oil, maybe twice a day. Then oftentimes if I have someone with like pain at night or can't sleep, then you can do what's called a balanced oil or a category 3 oil that has equal parts CBD, THC. Usually those ones are like 10 milligrams CBD, 10 milligrams THC per mil. And you start someone at 0.1 of a mil, so 1 milligram of THC before bed. You put it in your mouth. It's partly absorbed in your mouth, partly people swallow it. Best absorbed with a little bit of fatty food. So people might take a little bit of olive oil or avocado or peanut butter. Just helps its absorption. Usually takes half an hour to an hour to sort of kick in and lasts again 6 to 8 hours. So,
perfect.
The THC, you start at 1 milligram Then you go to 2 milligrams a few nights later, 3 milligrams, 4 milligrams, and people will find their dose. People will say, 0.2 was good, 0.3 was better, 0.4 I slept amazing, 0.5 I woke up feeling a little bit impaired.
Right.
And so it's okay, well, 0.4 is your dose.
And does that
really
change over time?
specific.
Do people kind of get a tolerance to it, or?
Great question. Yes, and look, technically, yes, you can. You can certainly, with the oils, I don't think it happens so much. People might go up from 0.4 to 0.5, but it's certainly not, it's not a major thing. It's more of a concern if there are these people who are these sort of borderline recreation, they're sort of self-medicating adults who have used cannabis illegally, for lack of a better term, over many years, that already have a high tolerance to it. And the cannabis that's grown like illegally in people's backyards probably has a THC percentage of around 10%. Right. For context, the average joint at Woodstock had a THC percentage of about 2%. Right. The average backyard grower might hit 10% THC. These multi-million-dollar ASX-listed companies spending millions on their indoor grows are now hitting 30%.
Oh, okay, so it's getting
stronger. It's getting too
people
high.
Need to be aware of that.
So these are the flowers. These are when people inhale. You know, you get a tub of 10 grams of the flower buds, and they grind it up and put it in a vaporizer.
Yes.
And people do that for fast-acting relief. Then the THC really binds to the receptors in your brain within minutes, but only lasts an hour or two. So I tell my patients and other doctors that when you have the oils, that's a bit like your long-acting Levemir or Lantus. That's like your background foundational oil for your CBD on board, lasts 6 to 8 hours. Something like a 70-30 insulin or something like that.
Yeah.
The inhaled THC is a bit more like your Nova Rapid.
Yeah, well, well, that's a good way to kind of think about it too, because you sort of want to have that baseline. So if you're dealing with something like, you know, severe pain or cancer pain or that kind of thing, then you're obviously probably prescribing that with that kind of in mind, Yeah.
There's really I still haven't really found a reason not to have that background CBD on board. Perhaps if someone is usually very well and they get their once a fortnight migraine, cannabis is fantastic for headaches, by the way. I've had people who've had daily headaches and they use for a few months the oils, and they say the headaches just go away, and then they've stopped using cannabis and they've stayed away.
That's interesting.
It's thought that the Americans, there's a research group in America where they've stopped calling things like fibromyalgia, migraines, irritable bowel syndrome. Instead of calling it as an individual name like that, they'll say this is endogenous endocannabinoid deficiency. They say that the person's innate levels of anandamide and 2-AG are low, and so people have this heightened sensation to pain, and the pain, whether it's a headache or fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, the underlying cause is the same, and you give them the phytocannabinoids, and it's like dousing a fire. And that's been my experience clinically. So this is still a diagnosis that is sort of in dispute, but people are starting to kind of think about these pain syndromes in that way.
Yeah, fascinating. So tell us a little bit about, because, you know, I hear also that you've spoken about the oil, but you've also kind of slightly mentioned, you know, inhaling it, or, you know, is there any role in consuming it orally, or do you smoke it? Like, what are the different methods? Because when I looked at it, there was like 100 different brands, and after the end of a couple of days, it was like mind-blowing. So how do we take it?
Oils I think people should think about first, partly because you can titrate the dose, as I mentioned before, and it ends up probably being the most cost-effective way of having it as a medicine.
All right. That's good.
And a lot of the oils, a few years ago, it may have been $300 for a 30ml bottle. Now it's probably $100 to $150, so still can be prohibitive for some people.
And so 150, Nic, like how long is that going to last? It's sort of like an average dose.
Depends on the dose you take. So I think most people spend probably probably around $5 to $10 a day initially.
Right.
But what I've found, people, is if in the first 2 or 3 months, if you have your medicine 2 or 3 times a day, you use more of it, it feels probably expensive. Then your body comes back into balance. It's like a pendulum. You see people come into balance, and then they might be dosing twice a day, and they realise, actually, I'm sort of in balance now. I only need to dose once a day. And I say, fine, take it once a day. Go from.
And is it better to take it in the morning or in the evening, or does that depend on what you're trying to treat?
It depends on what you're trying to treat. Initially, almost universally, I get people to have a morning dose, an afternoon dose, and a nighttime dose. Usually in the form of 2 oils, and I call them the daytime oil, which is the CBD dominant, and they're for people who that sort of category 1 or category 2 oils. The TGA's it gets confusing. It's broken it down into 5 categories depending on the relative CBD to THC percentage. So category 1 oils are basically the CBD isolates, or those that have less than 2% THC. If it has even a milligram of THC, people can still test positive on a random salivary drug test from the police.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Hold that thought.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
Okay. Whereas a category 5 has a THC dominance greater than 98%. So it's THC dominant. Category 3 is balanced. Category 2 is sort of CBD dominant with some THC, and category 4 is sort of THC dominant with some CBD. So it's not precisely. So really, you have your CBD dominance morning and afternoon, almost no matter what your symptom is, whether it's pain, anxiety, autoimmune condition. And then you have your more THC, a little bit more THC in the evening. I just find if you get people sleeping over a few
100%.
months, then you see what's left over. Then you see what's the actual problem. And I suppose then the flour, you layer that on top.
Okay. And so that's the vape. Is that what you vape? Yeah.
So there's two different ways of doing it. Yes. So we can prescribe the flour, which literally they take the leaves off and the stems off, and you get these sort of buds or nuggets in a tub or a bag, and you take a small amount off, and people put it in a little grinder, and then they put it in a sort of handheld, they're called dried herb vaporizers. So legally in Australia, you should use a dried herb vaporizer, and you should use one anyway because they say they're about 95% safer for your lungs. The reason for that is, so when people smoke a joint, just say, they light it up to about 300 degrees Celsius, and it combusts a lot of especially people tend to mix it with tobacco and things, but you're basically burning out all those 499 ingredients in the plant, and you're just having pure THC.
So you're sort of losing the terpenes.
You're losing it. You're losing it all. It's a bit like drinking. It's a bit like someone drinking a bottle of ethanol compared to having a nice glass of Shiraz or something.
Pinot, right.
with all the Pinot, with all the flavonoids and other things in it. So, and they say that the dose of THC in a joint, for example, can be 200 or 300 milligrams of THC, compared to I would say when I give patients an oil for sleep, they probably have maybe 4 or 5 milligrams of THC for sleep.
So a massive difference, yeah.
It's a massive difference. So people say, I can't have cannabis. I had a joint when I was 18. It's like, well, if you drink a straight bottle of ethanol, of course it's going to be disastrous.
Yeah. And memorable in the wrong way.
In the wrong way. So then when you use a vapor, so the fascinating thing about a vaporizer, and you need a good vaporizer, there's only really 2 that are TGA approved, that the companies have invested the money to prove that they work at the temperatures they say, and it's not overheating the plastic and you're inhaling plastic.
Right. So you vape at a lower temperature,
yes,
is that right? Yeah, right.
So you vape, and again, this is where you need to know what terpenes. You're probably somewhere between 160 degrees Celsius to 200, maybe 210, 220 degrees. That's your range.
Right.
So the more stimulating, uplifting, focusing terpenes are activated at the lower temperatures, and generally the sedating terpenes are at 200 degrees also.
Fascinating.
So what you can get a flower that has 2 or 3% terpenes and a wide variety of terpenes at 160 degrees it can help the pain, and you focus and you go to work. A lot of my patients, I once calculated that my average patient is a 41-year-old working dad. A lot of those have pain and weekend warriors, and they're going to work and things. So they have pain relief and focus during the day, and they use the same flower at a higher temperature for sleep at night.
Right. How fascinating.
So you can get sometimes people, they actually need two distinct flowers. It's sort of a bit like, you can use cannabis almost like a cup of coffee.
Right.
So you're not going to have a coffee at morning and before bed, but sometimes you might use different flowers. And this, again, is less about the THC percentage and more about the individual terpene percentage and which actual terpenes are there. They say, one thing that I heard from someone recently is THC is a bit like the accelerator and the terpenes are more like the rudder. And so at 30% THC, you're going to go faster than at 20%, but the terpenes will determine which direction you go in.
Yeah, which is important if you're going to work. You want to know what boat you're on.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the companies recently have and these are really popular overseas in America and Canada, and just really coming into Australia the last 6 months or so, is these, they're called liquid vaporizers, where basically they distill the cannabis plant into an oil or a distillate, and they're in these little 1 gram glass or plastic tubes, and then you connect this heating element to it and heat up the oil and inhale the oil. So they're usually the size of a pen or so.
Oh, yeah, I saw them too, yeah.
So they're more discreet. There's a little bit, I still think we don't really know enough about them as far as safety and what you're inhaling. Again, I don't prescribe them a lot. They seem to be good for people like a working professional who gets a weekly migraine. They have a 1 or 2 second inhalation of that, and it can stop the migraine. Wow. Compared to taking in your flower and your grinder and your big handheld device, it just people don't, it's not really. It's
almost like an EpiPen for migraines.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Wow. So it's subtle. So I think those are still new to the market, and it's really I see them as breakthrough symptoms. If someone has chronic anxiety or chronic pain, there's a risk that you can. They can be, I think, habitually addictive. You have this thing in your pocket, you press a button, have an inhalation.
Yes,
I think people can get addicted to the process rather than the actual chemicals. But it's a bit like having Nova Rapid 10 times a day, like we're sort of saying. It's like, no, you need the slow, like cannabis is all about balance and slowness. And it's not this fast-acting, addictive, high THC hit. Then you're doing it all wrong.
It makes so much sense. This I like this analogy between the slow-acting insulin and the fast-acting insulin, because I guess it gives all of us practitioners a really kind of good overview about you setting up the baseline, and then you're working with the person's, I guess, life and life situations and events that occur, and then you can change the baseline depending upon, their current particular issues.
Exactly.
So what about side effects or interaction profile? Like, what do we need to know? I mean, we speak about how almost like ubiquitously amazing this particular product is, and it needs obviously a skilled practitioner to really find the perfect balance and the right impact and how you start. But what side effects are there, and what do we need to know? And are there interactions? So what are the warnings?
Yeah, great question. And certainly you hit on something. A lot of people in the cannabis industry are so obsessed with it that they have such a strong positive confirmation bias that it can do no wrong. And I'm aware of how I stand these days, but it certainly can. So the common side effects is for things like oils when people take it are usually mild gastrointestinal. And it's possibly because of not the cannabis itself, but the base oil, which is often coconut oil or MCT. And so they might get nausea, diarrhea, gastrointestinal just upset, usually very mild and short-lived. It can cause dizziness. I've certainly had patients who will come back and say they feel dizzy. But I say, okay, tell me about that. And I'm like, I took the oil and it was a weekend and I was just sitting in my garden just looking around, and I just felt a bit off, and I just didn't really want to do anything. And I'm like, were you just sort of relaxed and happy and content and just staring at the flowers? And I'm like, yeah. I was just sort of relaxed and really happy in my garden. I'm like, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. You've just never been relaxed before. You've never felt like this internal contentment. So they're not, the dizziness, I'm not sure it lowers blood pressure directly.
Yes.
But people have this feel, some people go, I just feel really unmotivated. I don't feel like training for my triathlon this weekend. I'm like, yeah, because you're sort of happy and content not doing that.
It takes away the striving. That's probably not going to be popular.
Yeah, it's not going to be. But they're the
Given
common
our
ones.
culture.
The oil, sometimes people say it sort of causes this burning feeling in their throat, or afterwards like a dry mouth. And then I guess so they're common. Fatigue, the sedation, impairment, certainly THC does cause that.
Yes.
So you've got to be, if people are driving, like if you take THC and you're impaired, do not drive. Similarly, if you take Panadine Forte and you're impaired, you shouldn't be driving. It's illegal.
That's right.
You touched on it before, tolerance. Yes, I think people who use flower do get a bit of tolerance. Addiction, yes, you get. Yes and no. It's certainly not the same as a benzodiazepine or opiate addiction. I don't think it's as strong as a coffee or chocolate addiction. It's a medicine that people like to take because their life is better when they use it. But people certainly don't need to take it every day.
You're right.
And withdrawal effects is another. I mean, you're talking about tolerance and addiction. We also, the hallmark of that is, do you get withdrawal effects? Not yes and no. Not like alcohol. It's not like a coffee withdrawal headache. It's not like the tremors of alcohol. It's almost probably a mild psychological craving for it.
Well, for the impact of it, perhaps too.
For the impact. I wonder if it's that feeling, like we talked about, that fault mode network. If people have anxiety and depression because of their constant negative self-talk, you have some oil or something and it takes that away, you're having a bad day. Of course you're going to be.
And I guess your point was that, to use it in the context of a more holistic treatment plan where you're building up your resilience, your internal psychological resilience can be really helpful as well.
Yeah.
What about driving, Nic? I know I promised I would bring us back to that, like driving or workplace safety. If somebody is like operating heavy machineries, what are the rules across Australia? Because I know a lot of people are trying to get these modified or changed. And
yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, because this is, I think, a hindrance to the whole industry.
So currently in Australia, except for Tasmania, it is illegal to have THC, they say, in your system when driving. So what does in your system mean? Well, that means in your body, I would assume. In your and THC is stored for weeks or months in your adipose tissue. So if people stop using cannabis, just say, it'll come out of your adipose tissue into your bloodstream, metabolize through your liver and out your kidneys over, they say, sort of 20 to 30 days. Just a quick anecdotal story. I was a while ago working in a detox unit and we had a heavy user, a very overweight young man. I think he was 3 or 4 grams a day, and it took about 65 days for his to come out of his urine.
Wow, okay. So the more adipose tissue you have, the longer it's going to take.
I think it's a mix of genetics, adipose tissue, how long you've used for and how much you've used. Some people use 5 grams a day of like illegal cannabis. A lot of those people, just as an aside, if those people come to me, because often they're self-medicating, and so then you put them on the CBD oil, THC oil, you can get them probably down to 1 or 2 grams a day using a vaporizer. So for harm minimization, it's just fantastic what we can do for these people. So driving, the police are not testing your urine and blood. They do salivary testing. So then the question is, and they're not testing for CBD, they're testing for THC. So how long is it in your saliva? Everybody, unfortunately, is very different. I've had somebody self-test, like they've bought their own salivary drug testing kits, and they say they were positive 8 minutes after and negative 1 hour after. I've had the only one patient that I've ever had that's actually been charged. He swears it was 14 hours after he took his oil.
Right.
And I have no reason not to believe him. So what does that mean for someone taking an oil at 9 p.m. at night, wanting to sleep, but has to drive to work at 7 a.m.? I don't know. It means they're taking a risk. is what it means. Most people, I think it would be out of your saliva the next morning. This is where sometimes we're starting to use capsules or wafers, mostly capsules, because what we believe, and we haven't proved this, that the THC is inside the capsule, you swallow it, the THC doesn't recycle back into your saliva. So theoretically,
I see.
a capsule, you bypass it. So now we don't want to be encouraged. I also don't want to seem like I'm encouraging this, right? Because if you're impaired, whether you're impaired from from cannabis, Canadine 4, Lyrica, sleep deprivation, or you can be impaired driving. If you've had a really emotional day, you can be impaired driving. All these things, you shouldn't be driving. It's risky. So,
well, your point is too is that like it's actually legal to drive if you're taking opioids or Lyrica, as you mentioned, another.
As long as you're not, like the rules do say, as long as you're not impaired. If you drive through someone's front fence and you're impaired on Lyrica, the police can still charge you.
Right.
So this is a bit of a problem because I have a lot of people who have so much pain they can't sleep. So they're chronically sleep deprived. We know that chronic sleep deprivation is equivalent to what? A blood alcohol of 0.05, 0.1?
Yes, or more.
Or something. Yeah. So I have many patients who I think they have their THC at night. So again, we're assuming this is active, maybe 6 hours in your body attached to your cannabis receptors in your brain. So you sleep, it's worn off by 3 or 4 a.m., but you have 8 hours of sleep. Your brain is superior in the morning from having had that medicine than not.
Yeah.
For the police to potentially charge you at 9 or 10 a.m. is outrageous. For taking a legally prescribed medicine when you're not impaired is outrageous. Workplaces are a bit of a mix. So that's not a legal thing. That's more workplace policy. Again, I've had some workplaces contact me and they say, look, we like this person. We want them to work. We need help changing our own policies. Can you please write a letter, explain this? And I'll say something like this. We know it only lasts 4 to 6 hours. We think they'll be more cognitively intact, better decision makers having had a good night's sleep. And some workplaces say, yes, that's fine. They write a letter, they accept it. Some workplace, if you work for, I don't know, a massive mining company, bit of a different story. They're not as flexible. The only state currently where they have changed their laws is Tasmania, with the caveat that it has to be prescribed. It's under the Driving Drug Act of Tasmania, so it has to be a Tasmanian practitioner prescribing to a Tasmanian patient dispensed from a Tasmanian pharmacy. The problem is there aren't many, and this happened because there was a mainland doctor prescribing to a Tasmanian patient and the pharmacy was on mainland Australia. They were charged because the patient fell outside of the Act. That's being challenged in court at the moment. The problem is there aren't many Tasmanian doctors prescribing apparently.
Okay.
So the whole thing is very messy at the moment, very confusing. And people ultimately, I think, are deciding whether or not basically to take a medicine to treat their pain, to fall asleep, or risk losing their license. And that's the current state of play. There are lots of people working at it at the moment.
I know there's something in play at the moment, so if people are interested, then they can have a look online and
absolutely.
And put their voice to it. So I just wanted to finish by asking you about what you think the future of medical cannabis can be. We know that there's been an absolute explosion. I look on LinkedIn and it's looking for doctors to prescribe this medication every day. What do we need to know? What do you think the future is, and how do we know which ones are the kind of cashing in kind of organisations? And is there a way in which we can sort of distinguish between a reputable practitioner, such as yourself, very learned, very impassioned about it? Yeah.
Yes. So I guess my vision, where I hope it goes, is that this becomes a very accepted, widespread medicine that a lot of doctors use. As I mentioned before, the GPs, pain specialists, neurologists, paediatricians, we all use it, and it just becomes another tool in our kit.
Just normalised.
Very normal. and we reduce certainly it works to reduce opioids. I get people off opioids, get people off benzos, I get people off alcohol. They substitute a 6-pack of beer for a quarter of a mil of oil. Suddenly they lose weight and their back pain gets better. All these things. Anyway, I digress. That's what I see. Cost-effective, good medicine. It's in nursing homes, hospitals, taught in medical schools. And in fact, we Australian doctors then go out and teach the world how to use it, because I think we're actually doing it the best in the world. California, America, Canada, where they have these pop-up dispensaries and bud tenders, I consult with those patients. I tell you what, the Canadians and Americans have absolutely no idea how to use this as a medicine.
Wow.
Fantastic. Using it recreationally, buying low-dose CBD gummies or something, fine, whatever. They do not know how to use it as a medicine. Australia could lead the world in this.
Fantastic.
The problem is people now, there are all these rogue clinics popping up. Now, I'm actually starting to think the word clinic is too generous to them. They're not clinics. They're business people who make a nice-looking website with an ABN, and they somehow find doctors who are willing to have 2-3-minute consultations. Normally a nurse will talk to the patient first and just go make sure they're eligible, and then the doctor will see the patient for a couple of minutes, write a script, usually for the product owned by the company. So this is what we call closed-loop prescribing. A company will get a license, they'll import some flower oils from somewhere in the world, I don't know, Lithuania or Portugal or South Africa or Canada, brand them themselves in Australia, then the doctors will prescribe those products through their own pharmacies, and they'll just prescribe high repeats, high quantities, and then offer really low prices. So it takes me, when I see a new patient, I see them for 45 minutes. I cannot do my consultation in less time than that. By the time I get to know the patient and decide and come up with a treatment plan that works. My treatment plans are unique. I see it more. I feel more like I'm I call them a sommelier at a degustation restaurant. I feel more like I'm wine matching a 7-course dinner than prescribe. I have no idea. I tell my patients, I have no idea what I'm going to prescribe you until about half an hour in. It has to come to the idea and the combination of things. It's almost like the idea lights on me. And sometimes I'm like, no, that's still not right. And I just have to wait for it to kind of click in my brain. Go, I know what you need. This is
sounds beautifully creative, Nic.
It suits me really well, Michelle. I love it. So to do it in 2 minutes. I tear my brain out thinking about it. It's terrible medicine. Insulting. And all these patients then come to me, they go, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm taking. It didn't work. It was too strong. It was this.
It was expensive.
So it was expensive. The only thing that's not expensive is they're charging $30 consult fees or something. Yeah. Or some of them offer Black Friday deals, $15 new consults or something. I mean, it's terrible. If it's too cheap, the company is making money elsewhere. And some of these companies you'll see on LinkedIn, there were a couple recently at awards nights, and they were boasting how they were the fastest growing tech company in Australia. Yeah. Well, there was another one, the fastest.
Not healthcare.
Forbes fast. I'm like, you're not a tech company. This is healthcare. This is medicine. But they're not. They're out, and the TGA can't do much about it because they're not actually clinics. They're not health companies. They're tech companies, and TGA has no authority over them. So I think patients, and it's so hard, I think, for patients to know because the websites will say holistic care will look after you and this, but usually the websites don't list the doctors. Blind. You have no idea who you're talking to. So they all look the same. It's a real problem, and there's no one really doing anything about it from my point of view. They're sort of letting it go, and I don't really understand why.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, capitalism.
So where's the future of medicine? Well, I think the pain specialists are looking at our industry going, it's all rogue. It's full of rogue cowboys prescribing heavy quantities. And that's where people can have addiction. They can become it can cause psychosis. There's an odds ratio of 1.5 or so for young men. And interestingly enough, it's men in their 20s and 30s are high risk of psychosis, and women in their 40s and 50s are higher risk of psychosis. Again, I think it's this, you detach from your default mode network. You sort of don't know who you are anymore if you're using 3 or 4 grams a day. Yeah. But if your doctor is working for a company receiving kickbacks for how many scripts you write, well, then they're just going to pump up the scripts and the THC, and it's causing problems. And then then the pain specialists and the neurologists, they think we're all crazy and they're seeing all these negative side effects. And really the thing I worry about is with the risk of losing this as a medicine. This is a beautiful medicine.
Yeah.
But if it's over-commercialised, the stigma of it is going to continue to be negative and we're going to lose it.
Mm.
And
so I just wanted
I think is a disaster.
Yeah. No, I can hear that. I can hear that passion and also that intelligence. And how can our practitioner audience collaborate with specialists in this space? What is some advice you can give them just to finish?
I can't control all these other clinics, but I can hopefully influence new doctors coming in.
Fantastic.
I think just, what can you do? Asking general practitioners if they're prescribing, inviting them to say, oh, look, I've heard this can be really good. What do you think about this for our patient? I think there's I think GPs are going to be the main group that are going to get on board. I think that's because we're not aligned to any one body system or any one medicine or anything like that. And GPs, I think, end up seeing all these patients that symptoms don't quite fit. The rheumatologists, the neurologists, and cannabis can be like this central medicine you give your patient. So I think that the first group that will really adopt this, and then it will spread to the specialists, will be the general practitioners. So I think if practitioners and people can just start to talk to their doctors about it, say, look, I'd really like to try it. I'd like you to prescribe it for me. I'd be happy for a GP to call me and go, what do I do? Great, I'll talk to you for an hour about it. They don't need to come to me, and that doctor doesn't need to become one of my doctors. Stay in your own clinic. I don't need your patients or your referrals. I'm busy enough.
Yeah.
I'd much rather educate
Fantastic.
people and say, look, I want you bring this to your community. Most of my patients are regional because they just can't find anybody in their area.
Wow. What a fascinating conversation, Nic. So amazing to hear your passion and your love for this, really. It's such a fast evolving space, and thank you for your integrity and for taking us on that journey today. There's so much to discover in these plant medicines, and it's all very exciting.
Absolutely it is. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for listening today. Don't forget that you can find all the show notes, transcripts, and other resources from today's episode on the FX Medicine website. I'm Dr. Michelle Woolhouse, and thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time.
This podcast is intended as healthcare practitioner education only, and it is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Make sure you never miss an FX Medicine episode by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.